Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Burro Lot 17 wash processed Panama from H&S Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And H&S, based out of Laramie, Wyoming. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, as they've quickly become one of my favorite coffee roasters in the entire world. This coffee was a collaboration with Airworks, as they released two coffees together, the first of which was the Iridescence, which is a coffee that we reviewed last year and enjoyed so much that it did end up third place in our top 10 coffees of 2024 list. And then the other coffee that they released was this one right here, which definitely caught my interest, given that washed Panamanian geshas do remain my favorite coffee in the entire world. So given that we did review that Iridescence last year, we're not going to be reviewing that one, but I definitely wanted to review this one, as it felt like a great opportunity to try out one of my favorite coffees from one of my favorite coffee roasters. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how it's turned out, as this right here is day 59. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our higher extraction H&S one, which is a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And there's actually some struggle as to which brew method I did prefer this coffee with, as the final notes we do have on the tasting wheel was made with the V60. That being said, I might have had a slight preference towards the Chemex on this one. Either way, we did go significantly finer on the grind with both of those brew methods. Now, roast profile for this coffee, it's definitely been in line with our previous experiences with a lot of the coffees that we have had from this coffee roaster. I do believe that they have this one listed as an ultra light, and based off some of the results that we've received from this coffee, it definitely is in line with that, as H&S is one of the lightest roasting American-based coffee roasters out there, and this coffee definitely represented that, as this one is an extremely light coffee by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 31, first impression through the V60, and the coffee was offering a slight bit more intensity than expected for what this coffee was. A washed Panamanian gesha from H&S with this sort of profile definitely lent itself towards having maybe not necessarily the most intense or out there first impression, but it was very clean, with some of the florals being the focus, especially in the jasmine-like scents, even if it was all a little bit more toned down and subdued. A slight bit of graininess as well as some citric qualities, with the best of this one definitely yet to come from this point going forward. Day 34 through the Chemex, and the coffee is nice again, but now it's giving the sense that it's probably not quite ready, as it's been consistent with our experiences on the Chemex for H&S's coffees, which we've struggled a lot with H&S's coffees on the Chemex, as there are very few that we've actually had good results with. A slightly generic gesha feel with a lingering jasmine florality and a super clean base, a slight bit of graininess as well, which definitely was an indication of this profile being extremely light. Excellent, but definitely felt like this one was going to benefit from some time and adjustments. Day 37 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee is showing the most amount of potential it has up to this point, as it definitely feels like this coffee should take off when we do finally push it. There's a slight bit more of the classic graininess to it, with the intensity in a floral sense. I should say that classic gesha-like graininess to it. A very clean base with a little bit more intensity overall. So just starting to see glimpses of what this coffee is going to be capable of. And I was very excited on this day 40 mark, as we finally got the opportunity to push this coffee. And that's what we did through the V60, higher extraction adjustments, higher temperatures, lower concentration, and a more fine grind. And the coffee was definitely the best it had been to this point, as it still felt like it was on the verge of being at its very best, as it does continue to focus primarily on the floral forward experience, with a slight tartness that's in line with the listed raspberry, but it's still very soft. And it's very interesting going into this review that I saw that raspberry note as the first note. I have heard on some of H&S's videos that they do tend to put the first note as the one that they found to be the most abundant within the coffee. So raspberry being the first note on this bag was pretty interesting to me. I didn't necessarily expect to see too much of that. And as of this moment, I still haven't experienced too much of that from this coffee. So we'll see what happens from this point going forward, as on day 43, we opted for the Chemex with the same adjustments, and there's still a strong sentiment that this coffee is on the verge of opening up, as it's primarily delicate but closer to our experience with Substance's El Burro in a very clean, delicate, and floral sense. It does have a slight bit of a white peach feel to it in a very subtle, sugary sense. Now, for anybody that doesn't remember, we've actually reviewed the same coffee from Substance, and I very much enjoyed their take on this coffee, and I was really hoping that this one would somehow surpass that. So we'll still see, as Still at this moment, everything is kind of on the verge of improving, as on day 46, we opted for the V60 with an even more fine grind, and the coffee still feels like there's significantly more room for it, as it does feel extremely clean with the most gesha-like qualities it's had up to this point, a classic floral gesha citric grain quality to it, and a slightly more pronounced intensity overall. But outside of that, the coffee has still remained a little bit more soft and delicate, more so than we were still hoping for. So even as we're continuing to push this coffee, we're still not necessarily getting the desired results from it. Day 49 through the Chemex, and this was the standout day for this coffee, and that's why I said at the start of discussing this one that it probably could have been the Chemex that we did enjoy this coffee the most with, given this experience right here on day 49, as it was beyond stunning, offering the best iteration of any of the El Burro coffees we'd ever had. So it was sweet, intense, very clean, Panamanian gesha cereal grain quality to it in a very extremely well-defined sense. Plenty of the jasmine-like characteristics very defined, and the trademark vanilla marshmallow-like H&S feel. This was a very stunning experience, easily one of the best experiences I've had from any coffee that we've reviewed this entire year, so I was truly floored by the overall impression of this experience. And on day 52, we opted for the V60 with the same adjustments, and it still didn't necessarily have the same results that we had on that day 49 mark, but it is worth noting, and I really have to kind of highlight this, the grinder made an unusual noise when I brewed it on this day, so I feel like there was actually something that had happened with the grinder when I was brewing this coffee on this specific day. And I don't think that this coffee necessarily turned out as it should have on the day that we brewed it, as I did look, and the grind was a little bit more uneven than I was necessarily expecting, so I'm not entirely sure what happened, but in the name of transparency, I just have to be completely open with that. And I feel like that might have impacted our tasting wheel and the results that we did get from this day 52 mark, and why I might have preferred the Chemex with this coffee. But regardless, we made all of the notes given that we were running out of coffee to work with, so as a result, this is what we have. It did have a little bit better definition to it than some of the earlier experiences, and was still offering plenty of the florality to it, but outside of that, it was skewing a bit more on the lemon side of things than some of the earlier experiences we'd had. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And even with everything I've mentioned, we still have 2 level 5s. Let's go through both of those. Cleanliness, level 5. So I don't think that was ever in danger regardless of what happened with this coffee, as right from the start, it was super clean. And we reserved the level 5 cleanliness for coffees just like this, as this one offered such a clean base to it that there was really no other place for us to put this one. Now, while there might not have necessarily been the best amount of definition on the day that we made this tasting wheel, if we were to go based off that day 49 mark, you could see it being on the higher side of the level 5, if anything. Very clean, very well-defined coffee when you're able to get it at its best. Florality, level 5, and jasmine was the first note that we found within this coffee, and it was one of the most consistent notes to it. But outside of that, the combination of that vanilla-like H&S honeysuckle, I shouldn't say honeysuckle, that vanilla marshmallow H&S quality that we do tend to get from a lot of their coffees was also pretty prominent within this one. But outside of that, it's a very floral-forward coffee, which is also in line with our experiences with El Burro coffees in general. All right, a couple of level 4s. We'll start with the finish, level 4. It does have a pretty, I would say, even and much more clean finish to it. It doesn't have that very lingering, long-lasting floral sense, which I was kind of hoping for, if I'm being completely honest. It seems to kind of shorten within that finish, and while it can be sweet at times, I don't necessarily think that it was always there. The florals can be a little quick to finish, and at the same time, the citric qualities are also prominent on certain days to the point where it was the most abundant quality within the finish as well. So level 4, where we opted to put that, kind of have mixed feelings on that, as for the most part I was really hoping it would have that lingering cereal grain quality that we get from a lot of the Panamanian geshas, which was there at times, but it was also somewhat fleeting. Sweetness, level 4. It was still a pretty sweet coffee, and I do have to give it that, as I feel like it was a little bit sweeter than the experience that we did have from Substance as well, which was probably going to play a very significant role in our comparison between these two coffees. So level 4, where we opted to put that, at its very best, it does have a lovely bit of sweetness to it, especially in that H&S sense. Citrus fruit, level 4. And I mentioned that on the day that we made this tasting wheel, we did have some issues, and the citric quality shot up a little bit more than we'd experienced beforehand. So this one might have been a result of the issues that we did have grinding this coffee, and for that reason, level 4 might not necessarily be a true indication of it, but it's what we were getting on this day. Let's go ahead and move on to level 3s. Acidity level 3, that's consistent though. It was always a subdued brightness, which oftentimes we can experience from H&S's washed coffees. Not usually the brightest coffees out there, and I'm more than okay with that, as it definitely was a little bit more toned down in that sense. Berry fruit, level 3, and they do have that raspberry note listed on here, and I'll be completely honest, I was never able to get it. I did get a slight bit of a tartness, and that could have played a role in that, but I feel like that tartness was a bit more in line with a citric quality to it. I can see it. It might have been the priming effect that pushed this one all the way up to a level 3, but raspberry is a little bit too far for me to see on this one. Stone fruit level 3, I did get traces of that white peach-like characteristic to it, that sugary quality, which definitely did seem to add a little bit more depth to it. So level 3 where we opted to put that. And then only one other thing we're discussing. We have the body at a level 1. This one definitely had a very light-bodied profile to it. It's very much what I was expecting for a washed Panamanian gesha, so don't have too much to add to that. Outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a moderately good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This is one of the most to be continued reviews that we've ever had, largely because I don't really know how I want to go about this one. That day 49 mark at its very best is one of the best experiences that I've had from any coffee, not just that we've reviewed this year, but that we've reviewed over the last couple of years, as it's everything that I look for. Super clean, super floral, super sweet, and even some fruit depth to go alongside that. So it easily would have been one of my favorite coffees of the entire year. It would have been a very strong contender for my favorite coffee of the entire year had we been able to replicate that experience right from the onset. But given that we went through, 6+ days of this coffee where I still feel like it's on the verge of getting better, it's on the verge of getting better. And then when we finally got to that point, it seemed to backtrack largely because of some issues we had brewing this coffee. It's difficult to rate a coffee that high, largely because you're only able to get one truly standout experience from it. Now, it could be on us. We could have waited a fair bit longer to start this coffee, and that's probably what we should have done. And that seems to be the lesson when it comes to H&S's coffees, is just preach patience and continue to wait, and you will be rewarded with these coffees, especially if you do push them. But whatever happened on this coffee, it didn't seem to yield those results, with the exception of the one day that we did get those impressive results. So as a result, this coffee could have easily been one of our favorite coffees for the entire year, and that one experience that we did have was one of my favorite experiences of the entire year, but it's just kind of the best place to leave it at that. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, start with the very light profile of this one. So you do need to hold on to your patience for that, and if you do hold on to your patience, then you will be greatly rewarded if you're able to replicate a lot of the experience that we did have, as this one will be your classic Panamanian gesha. Super clean, very floral, great sweetness, a lot of intensity to it, and a lighter bodied profile as well. So all of those expectations that you do have for a Panamanian gesha and a lighter profile, that's what this one did offer, and it does have extraordinarily high potential. So that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the El Burro Lot 17 wash processed Panama from H&S Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.